He was more effective than Kozhedub and Hartman. Each of his sorties was a death sentence for the enemy. He single-handedly attacked 7 men, rammed planes when they ran out of ammunition, and avenged his executed father. His name was Nikolai Gulaev, and he was supposed to be legend number 1. But at the height of his fame, he was suddenly recalled from the front. Why was he stripped of his 3rd hero's star? What fight in a Moscow restaurant broke his career? And how did the most formidable ace of the war turn into a slipped hero whose exploits were ordered to forget? A story of incredible valor and tragic injustice, which was hidden for decades. The pantheon of World War II heroes seems unshakable, carved in the granite of public memory. When we talk about the best fighter pilots, 2 names immediately come to mind. Ivan Kozhedub, a 3-time hero of the Soviet Union, and Alexander Pushkin, the first in the country's history to be awarded the title 3 times. Their faces look out from posters, and their biographies are textbook examples of valor. But what if, in the shadow of these titans, there was a figure whose combat effectiveness, that cold, ruthless kill ratio, surpassed them both? What if there was an ace who, despite spending significantly less time in the sky, achieved nearly the same results, with every second mission ending in a downed enemy plane? Such a man existed. His name was Nikolai Gulaev. His statistics are staggering and shatter common perceptions. In less than 2 years at the front, he flew 240 combat missions and, in 69 aerial battles, personally shot down 55 enemy aircraft, with another 5 as part of a group. If you divide the number of victories by the number of battles, the result is an almost unbelievable ratio, 0.8. No one, neither in the Soviet Air Force nor in the vaunted Luftwaffe, could boast such deadly efficiency. To shoot down his 64 planes, Ivan Kozhedub fought in 120 battles. The legendary German ace Erich Hartmann, the all-time record holder with 352 victories, fought in 825 aerial battles to achieve them. Against this backdrop, Gulaev appears as an angel of death, a fiery meteor that blazed across the front-line sky, leaving a trail of burning Messerschmitts and Junkers, only to disappear just as suddenly. But Gulaev's greatest mystery isn't his phenomenal success rate, but his almost complete obscurity to the general public. Why did a man who should have stood on the same pedestal as Pushkin and Kozhedub, and by some metrics even higher, end up in their shadow? Why didn't his name become a household name, a synonym for a sky warrior? His biography is filled with strange gaps: a sudden recall from the front at the height of his fame, the absence of a 3rd hero's star that he seemed destined to receive, and a quiet, almost obscure post-war career that didn't match the scale of his achievements. It's as if some unknown force repeatedly pulled him from the spotlight, hiding him from the thunderous fame he had earned with his blood. And here, another strange detail emerges, another piece of the mystery: his childhood nickname, Kolobok. At first glance, it seems random, perhaps given for his short stature or round face. But if you consider the essence of the old fairy tale, the nickname takes on a chilling, prophetic meaning. The fairy tale character Kolobok is not a story about food, but about escape. He is a character who gets away from everyone, from grandpa, from grandma, from the hare and the wolf. He is elusive, slippery, a perpetual runaway. And the fate of Nikolai Gulaev, upon closer inspection, bears a striking resemblance to this story. He escaped death in dozens of lethal dogfights. He escaped the enemy aces who hunted him. As we will see, he even escaped just punishment for his audacious antics. But in the end, he also escaped the ultimate prize, the nationwide recognition that seemed to be falling right into his hands. This story is an attempt to solve the riddle of the pilot nicknamed Kolobok, the most effective and most unknown ace of World War II. To understand the nature of Nikolai Gulaev's unbridled, almost elemental talent, we must return to his origins, to the Don steppes steeped in the scent of wormwood and the wind of freedom. He was born on February 26, 1918, in the Cossack village of Aksayskaya near Rostov, in the very heart of a land where the word freedom has always been synonymous with life. In his veins flowed the blood not of humble farmers, but of Cossack descendants, a proud, independent people quick to bold action. This Don's spirit of reckless daring and contempt for blind obedience would become the core of his character, both his strength and his curse, defining his entire destiny, on the ground and in the sky. His childhood was typical for the time: 7 years of primary school, followed by a factory apprenticeship school. Nothing pointed to a heroic destiny. He became a tool and die maker at a Rostov factory for enameled cookware, and his life seemed set on a well-trodden path: the factory whistle, the gate, the shift, and home. But a new era was already in the air. The 1930s were a time of universal, almost religious worship of aviation. The entire country, young and old, dreamed of the sky, of Chkalov's records, and the feats of polar heroes. Thousands of flying clubs, opened across the Soviet Union, became social elevators for the boldest and most daring young men. And young Nikolai Gulaev, with his innate passion and thirst to break free from routine, could not resist this universal impulse. In the evenings, after an exhausting shift at the factory, he would run to the Rostov Flying Club. It was his escape into another reality. There, at the controls of a U-2 trainer biplane, he first felt what would become his greatest passion: the intoxicating sensation of flight, of mastery over machine and space. The sky didn't just captivate him, it consumed him. Here, unlike on the factory floor, everything depended solely on him, on the steadiness of his hand, the speed of his reaction, the boldness of his decision. The instructors immediately saw in him a divine spark, not just the ability to fly a plane, but an innate, primal instinct for flying, an intuitive understanding of air combat dynamics. He didn't just fly, he thought in 3 dimensions, his brain working like a gyroscope, instantly calculating trajectories and angles of attack. This passion determined his path when he was drafted into the Red Army in 1938. A young man with hours logged at a flying club wasn't sent to the infantry. He was sent directly to the Stalingrad Military Aviation School, one of the country's best training grounds for pilots. Here, they tried to force his freewheeling Don spirit into the rigid framework of military regulations and air combat manuals. But his nature resisted. He absorbed the knowledge, but always sought his own way, his own signature style. He was a born improviser, not a Methodist. He was irritated by standard patterns and dogmas. He believed not in the textbook, but in instinct, in that split second when you need to make an unthinkable, illogical maneuver that will bring victory. After graduating in 1940, shortly before the Great War began, he was assigned to a fighter aviation regiment based near Mogilev in Belarus. This was an air defense unit, forces designed for defense, for patrols, for the methodical interception of enemy aircraft. It seemed the most unsuitable place for his boisterous, aggressive temperament. Fate, it seemed, had deliberately placed this future predator of the skies in the cage of defensive tactics. But a cage could not long hold a bird born for free flight. The war was already on the doorstep, and very soon, his Don nature would break free to prove in its very first battle that victory in the sky belongs not to those who follow the rules, but to those who break them. The war struck the country suddenly, but for Junior Lieutenant Gulaev, it remained a distant, muffled rumble for a long time. His air defense regiment had been moved to the rear to protect important industrial sites. While grand and tragic battles unfolded at the front, he was forced into routine patrols. For his fiery nature, this was agonizing. He yearned for battle, listening to reports from the front lines where his comrades were dying to defend their homeland, and he felt like a predator, caged while the pack was out hunting. This forced inaction, this burning impatience, built up inside him like static electricity, ready to erupt at any moment in a blinding flash. And that moment came. On August 3, 1942, under the cover of night, a lone German bomber, likely a reconnaissance plane, was detected approaching the airfield. The regiment's command assessed the situation and decided not to risk scrambling fighters. The young pilots had no night flying experience, and the risk of losing one of their own planes in the dark was too high. To everyone, it was a reasonable and logical order. Everyone, except Gulaev. In his mind, the order to avoid unnecessary risk clashed with the dawn principle of never letting the enemy escape. The latter won. What he did next was an act of pure madness and blatant insubordination. Without a word, he dashed to his fighter, jumped into the cockpit, and barked at the stunned mechanic, "Start it up!" Violating a direct order from his commander with no clearance for night flights, he single-handedly lifted his yak into the inky darkness. This wasn't just a risk, it was an act that, in wartime, would warrant a court-martial. But at that moment, he wasn't driven by logic, but by the pure instinct of a hunter who had scented his prey. Guided only by the distant hum of engines and a silhouette barely visible in the night sky, he began his pursuit. In the pitch-black darkness, where earth and sky merged into one, he did the impossible. He caught the enemy, got on his tail, and with the first long burst from his cannons and machine guns, set him on fire. The huge Heinkel 111 erupted into a torch and crashed to the ground, its fall illuminating the nocturnal steppe. When he returned to the airfield, he didn't feel like a hero. He was a rule breaker, prepared for the worst. He was immediately summoned by the regiment commander. The dressing down he received was epic. The commander yelled, stomped his feet, and threatened him with a court-martial for his unauthorized action, for risking himself and a valuable aircraft. Gulaev stood with his head bowed, listening in silence. Then, when the torrent of curses subsided, the commander suddenly fell silent. He looked at him with a long gaze, a mix of anger and admiration, and uttered the legendary words, "For the unauthorized flight, you get a reprimand. For shooting down an enemy plane, and for the heroism you've shown, I'm putting you in for a state award and a promotion." This paradox, a reprimand and a reward at the same time, became the quintessence of his nature and his entire future destiny. He had proven that his audacity, his willingness to break orders and defy the system, got results. He showed that for him, there was only one law, the law of combat, and one goal, the destruction of the enemy. This first battle, this first downed Heinkel, was his baptism by fire, his initiation into the knighthood of the sky. He had paid for it by risking his life and career, but he gained something greater in return, confidence in himself and in his unique gift. From that moment on, it was clear that keeping such a pilot in the rear was a crime. His place was where all hell was breaking loose, at the front lines, and fate was already preparing him for the most terrible and most glorious trial of his life, the meat grinder in the sky over the Kursk Bulge, the summer of 1943. The scorching air over the Kursk Bulge trembles with the roar of thousands of engines. Here, on a narrow strip of land, two colossal armies have clashed in mortal combat, and in the sky above them, a battle has unfolded, the likes of which history has never known. It was here, in this fiery inferno, that Nikolai Gulaev's talent, his animalistic instinct, and his dawn audacity were unleashed in all their terrifying and mesmerizing power. He didn't just fight, he fell into a combat frenzy, transforming into a true celestial berserker for whom there was no fear, no doubt, not even the thought of defeat. His finest hour struck on May 14th, even before the great battle began. While repelling a raid on his airfield, he single-handedly charged a group of 3 Ju-87 dive bombers, which were covered by 4 Messerschmitt 109 fighters. It was suicide, 7 against 1. But Gulaev didn't play by the rules. He acted on instinct. Gaining speed at ground level, he executed a sharp climb, popping up under the belly of the lead junker and tearing it open with a short burst. The second bomber managed to open fire, but Gulaev dodged and shot it down as well. He tried to attack the third, but just then, his machine guns fell silent. He was out of ammunition. Anyone else would have disengaged, but not Gulaev. Without a moment's hesitation, he went in for the ram. Like an axe, he used the left wing of his Yak to shear off the German plane's wing, and it disintegrated in midair. His own fighter was thrown into a spin, but with an incredible effort of will, he leveled the machine just above the ground and belly landed it. Climbing out of the cockpit without a single scratch, he simply returned to his regiment, got into a new plane, and took off on another mission. This was only the beginning. During the days of the Battle of Kursk itself, Gulaev was doing the unimaginable. He was scoring up to 4 victories in a single day. On one sortie, his flight of 4 fighters, led by him, came face to face with an armada of 100 enemy aircraft. Instead of evading, Gulaev commanded, "Attack!" They tore into the swarm like a pack of wolves into a flock of sheep, sowing panic and chaos. After breaking up the German formation, they shot down 4 bombers and 2 fighters, and all 4 returned to their airfield unharmed. On that day, his unit destroyed 16 enemy machines. This was the tactic of audacity, the tactic of a wolf that bursts into a sheepfold, knowing that the sheep, despite their numerical superiority, will scatter in panic. His fighting style was the complete opposite of the calculated tactics of Pokrishkin, with his famous formula: altitude, speed, maneuver, fire. Gulaev was a master of the close-quarters dogfight, a virtuoso of dagger-like attacks from extremely close range. He would let the enemy get so close it seemed he could see the German pilot's face, and he would strike with certainty, with a single, lethal burst. His favorite maneuver was an attack from below, from the blind spot, where he was not expected. He was unpredictable, furious, and incredibly lucky. Bullets seemed to fly around him, and the German aces who tried to shoot down the daring Russian became his victims themselves. He was charmed, the Kolobok, who always escaped pursuit. For his exploits at the Kursk Bulge, where he personally shot down 13 planes and 5 in a group, he was awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. But he didn't rest on his laurels. After his regiment was re-equipped with American Air Cobras, with their powerful 37mm cannon, his kill rate became even more terrifying. In the spring of 1944, over the Prut River, he performed his most famous feat. Leading a flight of 6 Cobras, he attacked a group of 27 bombers escorted by 8 fighters. In a 4-minute battle, 11 enemy aircraft were destroyed, with Gulaev personally accounting for 5 of them. It was a rout, a slaughter, a demonstration of absolute superiority in tactics and skill. For this and other feats, on July 1, 1944, he was awarded his 2nd Gold Star of the Hero. He had become one of the greatest aces of the war, but behind this transcendent fury, behind this almost animalistic drive to kill, lay a deep personal tragedy that had transformed him from a simple pilot into an angel of vengeance. Behind every great fury, there is almost always great pain. The unbridled, almost supernatural ferocity that Nikolai Gulaev displayed in the sky had its own dark and tragic roots. To understand why this cheerful and sociable young man transformed into a grim, obsessed angel of vengeance, we must return to his hometown, to occupied Rostov. After a series of stunning victories, he was granted a short leave and went home, expecting the warm embrace of his family. But his home met him with a deafening silence and terrible news. His father, Dmitry Semyonovich, a quiet and modest factory worker, with no connection to the army or the partisan movement, had been executed by the Nazis during the second occupation of the city. This news was a blow that shattered Gulaev's world. It's one thing to fight an armed opponent in the sky, where the odds are even and the laws of fair combat apply. It's something else entirely to learn that your unarmed father, an elderly man, was simply hanged. For what? For being the father of a Soviet pilot? For simply being Russian? This senseless, vile cruelty burned away everything that had been inside him: his youthful zest, his competitive spirit, and even his simple sense of duty. In their place, only one scorching, all-consuming fire remained: a thirst for revenge, personal, merciless, and insatiable. According to his fellow servicemen, he returned from leave a different man. The cheerful joker, the life of the party, was gone. In his place stood a grim, taciturn, and incredibly focused warrior with a cold gleam frozen in his eyes. For him, the war was no longer a job. It had become his personal vendetta. Every German plane in the sky became a personal enemy, the embodiment of the force that had taken his father. Every mission became an act of retribution. He no longer chased awards or fame. He simply killed. He killed methodically, fiercely, and with a kind of dark joy, as if each new star painted on the fuselage of his plane was another nail hammered into the coffin of the hated enemy. It was this personal tragedy, according to many who knew him, that became the doping that transformed a talented pilot into a genius of air combat. He stopped fearing death because something inside him had already died. He would ram enemy planes, engage in hopeless battles, and fly into the very heart of the inferno because he was no longer driven by logic, but by a higher, irrational force, the power of hatred. And this power, multiplied by his natural gift, made him virtually invincible. His enemies, sensing this transcendent, almost mystical fury, would become confused and make mistakes. He, on the other hand, became even more precise, even more lethal, as if grief had sharpened all his senses to their absolute limit. This transformation explains much about his behavior. He was generous with his victories, often gifting planes he had shot down to his wingmen, especially those with families, since there was a cash bonus for downed aircraft. Neither fame nor money mattered to him. What mattered was the fact itself: another enemy destroyed. His personal tally of vengeance was growing. After a battle, when asked about a kill, he might simply wave his hand and say, "Credit it to my wingman, he's the one who brought him down." He was above the fray because his mission was sacred. He was avenging his father, and this sacred vengeance led him from victory, to new stars on his shoulder boards and fuselage, but it also pushed him toward that fateful threshold, beyond which the most inexplicable turn of his career awaited him. The summer of 1944. The Soviet army is relentlessly rolling westward, and final victory seems just within reach. It is at this very moment, at the absolute peak of his fame, that two-time hero of the Soviet Union, Captain Nikolai Gulaev, the most efficient pilot of the war, receives the strangest and most illogical order of his life. An order that sounds less like a reward and more like a sentence: immediately cease all combat missions and report to the rear. For a celestial berserker, for a man who lived for combat, this was equivalent to clipping an eagle's wings at the zenith of its flight. What was behind this decision? Concern for a hero or a desire to get him out of the way? The official version was noble and far-sighted. The Stalinist command, understanding that the war was nearing its end, decided to preserve its golden fund, the best aces who had proven their skill with their blood. These living legends were recalled from the front to be sent to study at the Air Force Academy. The calculation was simple. These battle-hardened men were to become the backbone of the future Air Force, commanding regiments and divisions and passing on their priceless experience to new generations of pilots. On paper, it all looked logical. Gulaev, along with other celebrated pilots, was among the chosen. But for him, this care was torture. He had no desire to go to the academy. He wasn't tempted by staff positions or a general's stripes. His soul belonged to the sky, the front-line sky, which smelled of gunpowder and adrenaline. He wrote reports, pleaded, and begged to be allowed to remain in the active army, to be given the chance to fight all the way to Berlin. But the system was unyielding. An order was an order. Realizing it was useless, according to one legend, he asked for just one thing: 3 farewell days, 3 last missions. And in those 3 days, August 10th, 11th, and 12th, he, as promised, methodically shot down 1 Focke-Wulf each day, as if putting a final period on his incredible combat biography. On August 12, 1944, he scored his last, 55th personal victory. His war was over. But behind the grand facade of the official version hides another story, more scandalous and far more likely to be true, which explains why Gulaev's career was so abruptly cut short. According to this version, he was recalled to Moscow not just for his studies, but also to receive his 3rd Hero's Star. He was supposed to stand alongside Pokrishkin and, according to some sources, even surpass him. But in the capital, his Don nature, intolerant of injustice, played a cruel trick on him. While celebrating his impending award with fellow pilots in a Moscow restaurant, he witnessed several officers from Allied Romania behaving provocatively and insulting Soviet women. Gulaev, without a second thought, stepped in. One thing led to another, and a massive brawl broke out, in which the 2-time hero of the Soviet Union and his comrades soundly thrashed the arrogant foreigners. The scandal reached the very top. At a time when Stalin was trying to build fragile relationships with new allies, such an incident was absolutely unacceptable. It is said that when the leader was informed of the fight, he was furious. The nomination for the 3rd star was immediately withdrawn, and Gulaev himself, instead of being honorably sent to the Kremlin, was effectively exiled to the academy. It was an honorable exile, a way to get a hero who was too boisterous and unable to control himself out of sight. If this version is true, then it was his heightened sense of justice, his freewheeling Don spirit, that cost him his place in the pantheon of the greatest heroes. He couldn't stay silent when he was supposed to. One way or another, the order from the ground cut his flight short. He was forced to obey. He was recalled from the front, denied the opportunity to increase his personal score to numbers that would have forever made him the country's top ace. This moment became the turning point in his fate. He not only stopped fighting, he fell out of the public eye. While Kozhedub continued to rack up his score, becoming a legend, Gulaev sat at a desk, studying tactics and strategy. The Kolobok had slipped away again. This time, from the thunderous glory that had been so close. The war was over. The victory salutes had faded, and millions of soldiers, trading their uniforms for civilian jackets, tried to learn how to live in silence again. For Nikolai Gulaev, the celestial berserker whose world consisted of roaring engines and tracer fire, this transition proved to be the most difficult test. The sky, which had been his element, his freedom, was suddenly empty. He, accustomed to constant risk and the intoxicating feeling of victory, found himself in the thick, sluggish atmosphere of peacetime, with its intrigues, compromises, and bureaucratic games. And here, his greatest asset, his Don audacity and straightforwardness, became his greatest weakness. He honestly tried to fit into the new reality. In 1950, he graduated from the Zhukovsky Air Force Engineering Academy, and then, 10 years later, from the country's highest military institution, the General Staff Academy. His career, at first glance, was quite successful. He was one of the first to master jet fighters. He commanded an aviation division in Yaroslavl, then an air defense corps in Rzhev. The pinnacle of his career was the post of commander of the 10th Independent Air Defense Army in Arkhangelsk, a huge formation that protected the entire northern frontier of the Soviet Union from a potential attack. He rose to the high rank of Colonel General, but his ascent stopped there. Compared to his colleagues, other famous aces, his career looked modest. He never became a marshal, never held high posts in the Ministry of Defense, and never became a national media figure. He always seemed to remain in a supporting role, in the shadow of his own, much more resounding victories. It was as if an invisible glass ceiling, erected either by his own difficult character or by that old incident with the brawl, kept him from rising to the very top. His directness, his intolerance for injustice and stupidity, which were so valuable in combat, proved to be a hindrance in peacetime. He was too honest, too blunt, too Don-like for the backroom games and staff intrigues. His solace was his hometown. He often visited his native Oksai, walked the streets of his childhood, met with school children, and talked at length with the local people. To them, he was not a forgotten hero. To them, he was Nikolai Gulaev, their pride, a living legend. He donated his personal belongings to the local museum, his flight helmet, goggles, map case, and photographs. Here, far from the hustle and bustle of Moscow, he could be himself again. But even this popular affection could not silence his feeling of unfulfillment. He was born for the sky, for combat, and he had been forced to live on the ground. Life after the war became a long, drawn-out winter for him, following one short but dazzlingly bright summer. He served his country honestly, was a good commander and a loyal comrade, but the fire that had burned in him over the Kursk Bulge was slowly dying out. He never received the third hero's star that had been the subject of so much speculation. He never surpassed Kozhedub's official tally, though he had every chance to do so. He remained in history as the most effective, but not the most famous. The Kolobok slipped away again, this time from posthumous bronze glory, remaining only in the memory of experts and his devoted countrymen. He died in 1985, quietly and almost unnoticed, just as he had lived the last 40 years of his life. When the roar of engines fades and the dust of battle settles on the pages of history, the time of myths begins. Heroes are cast in bronze, their biographies polished to a shine, and their names become banners. But the story of Nikolai Gulaev, the pilot with an almost supernatural talent, breaks from this orderly line. His figure was never frozen in a monumental pose. He remained alive, contradictory, inconvenient, and ultimately slipped away from history's final verdict. So, who was this Kolobok, the most effective and most unknown ace of World War II? On one hand, the answer is on the surface. He was a genius of air combat, a natural talent whose innate gift, multiplied by his Don audacity and personal tragedy, created a phenomenon of incredible combat effectiveness. His statistics speak for themselves. Every second mission ended in victory, and his kill ratio surpassed that of the most celebrated aces in the world. He was a master of improvisation, a celestial artist who painted unimaginable aerobatic figures in the sky and, with a stroke of machine gun fire, put a period at the end of his enemy's fate. In this sense, he is an absolute hero, an ideal warrior whose place should be in the front row of the pantheon of victors. But on the other hand, he was a man who absolutely did not fit into the system. His character, his refusal to tolerate stupidity and injustice, his readiness to break orders and charge ahead constantly created problems for him. He was too free for the army hierarchy, too sincere for political games. The story of the brawl that cost him his third hero's star is just the most vivid episode in the chain of his conflicts with reality. He was born for the element of battle, where personal valor, not rank or connections, decided everything. And when that element disappeared, he found himself an outsider at the feast of life that others had arranged for themselves. It is here that his nickname, Kolobok, acquires its final, tragic meaning. He really did get away from everyone. He got away from enemy bullets and Luftwaffe aces. He got away from a court-martial for his first unauthorized flight. He got away from death in dozens of mortal combats. But in the end, he also slipped away from the recognition that seemed destined for him. Fate gave him an incredible talent, but not the character to convert that talent into lifelong glory and honors. He was too alive, too real, to be turned into a flawless bronze monument. Nikolai Gulaev remains an eternal question in history. Was he a genius who was underappreciated, or a rebel who ruined his own career? Perhaps both. He was a fragment of another, bygone era, an era of dawn freedom, accidentally carried into the rigid, regulated world of the 20th century. He was a man for whom the freedom of flight was more important than a general's stars, and justice was more precious than his own fame. And therein, perhaps, lies his greatest, not fully understood feat. He remained true to himself until the very end. And that is why the story of his life is not just the biography of a pilot. It is a timeless parable about genius and the system, about talent and fate, about a hero who defeated all enemies in the sky but could never overcome earthly gravity. Thanks for watching to the end. If you liked it, please give it a like, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell so you don't miss new videos. There are more amazing stories to come. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.